Stop. Friendly fire. Chapter 6. Low rank sprint has become LV3. Beginner acid resistance has evolved to the low rank level. You can resist acid more effectively, and acid resistance is also given to your equipment. How long would he have to roll around in the clearing filled with dirty water? Shin Woo honestly felt thankful that he was a skeleton with unlimited stamina. Even if his stats were the same, he would have run out of energy already if he were a human and been squashed. TCH, you're still trying? Gurururu. As a result of it self-destructing in an attempt to shake off the flames of revenge, the great slime had reduced to the size of a normal slime. It did increase its speed significantly, but the problem was that it hadn't gotten used to its smaller size, so its charge attack's accuracy had dropped. Gurururuk. UMHP. Let's see. Shin Woo avoided its attack as he had gotten used to its movements. It slammed into the opposite wall and completely destroyed the surface of the wall. The force behind its charge had certainly become tremendous, but he could now close his eyes and still dodge its attack. My magic is slowly reaching its limit. Let's finish this. Guruk. If it wasn't for the bones stockpiled in his inventory, it would have been impossible to endure until now. He had completely used them up and squeezed out the mana to use his regeneration skill. All in order to endure. What's worse, he hadn't been able to repair a portion of his rib bones as they remained damaged until now. His armor was also worse for wear. He was already in this situation by the time his acid resistance had risen to low rank and he could imbue it to his armor. However, the important thing was that he hadn't died yet and endured. Flames of revenge. He thought about pouring all of his mana into the flames, but desperately controlled the urge, only instilling about half of his mana into the flames. He had left enough mana to utilize regeneration or the flames of revenge just one more time. If it didn't die after taking 2 shots, then he'd really have to die and come back to life. Low-rank magic affinity has become LV3. Magic has increased by 2. Your magic will have a greater effect with a lower amount of mana. The skill level had increased by a lot, but as he fought various battles within this dungeon, he felt as though he had taken a step into the domain of detailed mana control that couldn't be explained simply by skill level. There probably weren't many amongst the senior heroes that could manipulate mana as delicately as he could, so he could say that he was truly amazing. Though he himself didn't actually know that. Gurururururu. The great slime roared. It had realized that the flames that Shin Woo used weren't normal. It became aware that the next time those flames touched it, it would die, and tried to avoid the flames at all cost. It started to quickly bounce around everywhere, to the point that if one were to witness it, they would get motion sickness. Ha! However, Shin Woo launched his flames of revenge without even properly aiming it. Since its size had lessened significantly, the slime seemed to think that it could somehow avoid the flames, but from the start, the flames of revenge was a technique that couldn't be avoided. Gurururuk. As expected, the flames of revenge, neither quickly nor slowly, proceeded through the clearing and accurately struck the great slime's body. And because Shin Woo made use of the wind, the slime went up in flames. The flames burned slowly when its body was still huge, but now, its entire body was engulfed instantly. Kick. Kahik. At that moment, he heard a sound that he hadn't heard before from the slime. Shin Woo prepared for its self-destruct and curled his body up again, but no matter how long he waited, it didn't explode. Instead, this message appeared in front of him. You have hunted a LV3 great slime. You have achieved the feat of defeating an elite monster that was a higher level than you by only using fire. Magic has increased by 5. You have acquired the 4 elements, fire, token. Beginner Flames of Revenge has reached level 10 and evolved into the low rank level. You can create stronger flames with less mana, and you can imbue not only your weapons, but also your body with fire. He opened his non-existent eyes wide. It was already astonishing that he had gotten his 2nd token in this dungeon alone, but the fact that this message appeared meant. Shin Woo carefully raised his head. There was no explosion, and there definitely wasn't a charge coming. Through the great slime's rampage, Various parts of the clearing had collapsed, and he saw a sphere radiating light in the center. It was a core. Ha! Shin Woo saw that, and a lengthy sigh escaped his mouth. It was such a lengthy and intense battle that he couldn't easily get the feeling that it was over, despite it definitely being over. It kind of felt like the day he was discharged from the army. The battle had felt that long to him. But I still won. He couldn't give himself lip service and say he won due to his skill. Rather than needing his polished combat skills, he was just busy running away and shooting out flames. If this were a novel, the readers would say, "What kind of development is this?" and criticize it. However, he won. Regardless of the means necessary, he won. He won without dying. That was enough for him. He was as happy as he could be. He won, so it was now time to collect the loot. Shin Woo moved his creaking body and walked over to where the great slime lay dead. There were 4 things there. Perium, the great slime's core, someone's deteriorated bone, and finally, a large shield. You have acquired 11,210 perium. You have acquired the great slime's bone core. You have acquired a deteriorated skeleton shielder's shoulder bone. You have acquired a LV2 bone tower shield, +5. If this goes well, I won't even need to go the shop to level up. Due to his achievement, his stats had risen to a total of 396. He didn't have a way to tell what level monster the skeleton shielder was, but if he included this, and the great slime's bone core, it felt like he'd be able to raise his stats by at least 4. For starters, he collected the perium. He checked his inventory and saw that he had collected 71,130 perium after this last deposit. He was truly deeply moved. It only seemed like a couple days ago that he was pondering which bone he should pick, which cost a little more than 3,000 perium, yet to think he had gathered a sum of 70,000 perium already. He looked at his inventory and, after nodding his head a few times, moved on to his next task. That was to put all his equipment into his inventory. When I got to level 2, bone reinforcement had absorbed all of my equipment as well. Since there's a high likelihood of that happening again. Of course, at the same time, the bone reinforcement's effects had been truly amazing. It would retain the abilities of the weapons. No, it could increase those abilities during the absorption. However, even if he obtained the abilities his equipment had, the defensive capabilities, as well as their attack power, aren't retained. Since the Bone of Thunder Lasting and the Dire Wolf Bone Armor were items that possessed outstanding attack power and defensive capabilities, it would be a complete waste to sacrifice them in order to gain some stats. So, he needed to prepare before leveling up. And he actually removed the other items from his inventory, besides the Bone of Thunder Lasting and the Dire Wolf Armor. This included the shield he had just acquired. They were all level 1 or level 2 equipment, and they were items he received as rewards from the dungeons. Since both his weapon and armor were level 3, he thought the reinforcement would fail with this equipment, so he had stored them all. And if he were to aim for the right time for bone reinforcement with this equipment, he ascertained that that time was now, when he leveled up. He was starting to get the know-how of how this worked. Then shall we start? After he piled up the equipment right beside him, he inspected them with delighted eyes and raised the deteriorated skeleton shielder's shoulder bone in his hand. Bone reinforcement. You have reinforced your shoulder bone. Health has increased by 3. Absorbing a portion of the skeleton shielder's memories and experiences. Kukek, this warped, cursed body will ultimately be buried here. General, please forgive me for not being able to return to your side. Hiles Keller, who the hell are you? Why the hell are you saying something so profound? No, and if we're talking about a general here, is it Segald or Leofield? If not, is it a new, 3rd general? Why are all the generals here so popular? Damn it, I'll remember the name, Hiles Keller. He only wanted to improve his abilities, but why is this subplot constantly being attached? His curiosity naturally increased, but Shin Woo decided to ignore it for now. More importantly, his stats now totaled 399 through bone reinforcement. I'm so scared that I'm shaking. Shin Woo checked once again that his equipment was safely inside his inventory and cautiously grabbed the Great Slime's bone core. He gripped it in one hand, sighed once again, and initiated the reinforcement. The Great Slime's bone core reinforces your entire body. Magic has increased by 17. Acquiring a portion of the Great Slime's memories and experiences. Goo! Goo 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 ga 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 ga. Great Slime. The Great Slime's extremely clear memories passed through his brain. Its first memory was the moment its entire body was burning, going completely crazy, and self-destructing. It shouldn't be, right? He was worried with the Rat Queen that he'd get a skill based on birthing, but since he had acquired the regeneration skill as a result, it should be like that this time as well. It had to. The moment Shin Woo muttered to himself, trying to get himself to accept it, a dark magic hung over him, as though it had been waiting for this moment. It is time for you to receive the karma you were endowed. The LV2 Bone Tower Shield, +5, as well as the other 13 bone equipment were consumed all at the same time, and bone reinforcement has been executed. The effects of the equipment a lower level than you are halved. It went as expected. He didn't know how, but the moment he leveled up, all the bone equipment in his periphery were drawn to him and bone reinforcement was initiated. Perhaps this was why bone reinforcement possessed a modification ability. Perhaps it was for this very moment. The equipment flew and changed into small particles. The instant those particles were absorbed, he felt a strong power rising throughout his body, as well as a sign that something was changing. Shin Woo suddenly thought, perhaps, the ultimate goal of bone reinforcement is to integrate the strength of the bones, as well as the bone equipment into my body as one. Of course, it was still impossible to make a deduction. Did he have to try reinforcing bone equipment with other bone equipment, or should he try to reinforce his own bones? It was still a problem that he needed to solve. He couldn't say which exactly was more effective yet. From now on, this was a problem he'd have to look into, possibly for quite a long time. But right now, the only thing he was sure about was that he still needed the assistance of powerful equipment. Strength has increased by 11, agility by 9, health by 13, and magic by 12. You have learned the active skill, low-rank harden LV1. The bone reinforcement skill has become LV4. You can now target others and use your bone reinforcement on them. Even while he seriously considered his bone reinforcement and the direction of his growth, the change proceeded quickly. All the potential strength within the equipment was extracted, and as a result, his stats were reinforced beyond his wildest imagination. In the process of leveling up, his bones thickened once again and became even more durable. His height increased considerably and became close to 1 meter and 90 centimeters. His bones were even more saturated with darkness, and anyone that saw him would say that his bones were black. And once the acquired memories and experiences were collected and organized, they bore fruit. Low-rank sprint has changed into the combat sprint skill. The level remains the same. In exchange for the skill duration shortening, when it is used in tandem with attack skill, the attack is amplified. Agility has increased by 5. You have acquired the active skill, low-rank self-destruct LV1. By exploding a section, or even your entire body, you inflict tremendous damage to all your enemies in the surrounding area. You also take a significant amount of damage. Health and magic have increased by 3. Combat sprint was probably an ability that the shielder had. It had changed in a way that better suited him, so it couldn't get any better than this. More importantly, contrary to regeneration, he hadn't been saved from receiving the self-destruct skill. Shin Woo decided to think about this later. After all, there was something much more important that he had to do right now. A change much greater than any skill, a level up. You have become level 3. The effectiveness of your stats increases. Your proficiency in combat-related skills, with the addition of a bonus, increases. The boxes in your inventory increase by 20. Due to the feats you have achieved, your species changes. You have become a dark skeleton. You are more aggressive and handle magic superbly, but you are extremely vulnerable to divine power. However, you have been blessed by God, so this weakness is nullified. Resistances that lay dormant have been revealed. As he saw the message stating that his evolution was complete, Shin Woo, who had calmed himself down, checked his body and muttered. A dark skeleton, huh? A skeleton avenger, or a skeleton warrior, is like a job in a game, not a species. But this time, his species had actually changed. Honestly, his bones were all dyed black now, and with one look, he gave off more of a menacing impression than before. He felt that his strength and his magic were much stronger, to the extent that they were incomparable to before. If it was with his current strength, he felt as though he could face the great slime head-on. However, my bones have turned black, so will I be able to properly fool the skeletons? Shin Woo had a concern that truly befitted a hero, and smiled gently. He could actually feel just how much more powerful his body had become, so he was able to cleanly sweep away his uneasiness and concern over the future. Then, he had something he needed to check first. Despite Shin Woo roughly knowing, he shook for some reason, a reason that he himself couldn't understand. He smiled bitterly and opened his status. Shin Woo, Dark Skeleton Avenger, Treasure Hunter, LV3, Status Effectiveness 125%. Strength 113 plus 10, Agility 108 plus 10, Health 127 plus 10, Magic 130 plus 10, while dungeon bonuses are applied. Passive skills: Invisible Heart LV3, Acting LV4, Beginner Avenger LV1, Low Rank Bursting Thunder LV5, Low Rank Magic Affinity LV3, Low Rank Stealth LV3, Beginner Command LV5. Active skills: Bone Reinforcement LV4, Low Rank Combat Sprint LV5, Low Rank Shriek of the Dead LV1, Low Rank Regeneration LV1, Beginner Catapult LV9, Low Rank Flames of Revenge LV1, Beginner Power / LV7, Low Rank Harden LV1, Low Rank Self-Destruct LV1. Resistances: Holy, Max, Curse, Max, Acid, Low Rank LV1. Wow, it increased even more. When he went up from level 1 to 2, his stats effectiveness increased by 10%. Of course, that was plenty amazing, but now that he'd risen from level 2 to 3, it had increased by an additional 15% to a total of 125% effectiveness. Go figure, it felt like his body was overflowing with power, but the giant slime, which was only one level higher than him, felt way too strong. Levels really are everything in this world. He had acquired a lot of skills and had grown until now, but to properly unleash the power of those skills, his stats had to become his foundation. He felt like he understood why his seniors were so focused on only increasing their levels. Plus, they had revealed that they were level 6, so he couldn't imagine how powerful they were. Yet, even they wouldn't dare challenge the deep darkness that lay within the Empire. If we exclude the temporary bonus stats that the dungeon gives, my total stats are about 478. These numbers are impossible just from changing equipment. As I leveled up, my combat-related skills went up as well. Because of that, my stats increased even more, I see. Because of that, Bursting Thunder, Catapult, Power Slash, and even the command skill he hadn't had an opportunity to properly use, naturally leveled up, and his level 9 Shriek of the Dead, as well as Regeneration, went up to the low rank level all at once. Shin Woo knew how drastically the skills change when they go from the beginner level to low rank, so he was really excited and checked the information of the ranked up skills. Low rank Shriek of the Dead LV1, active. Causes the enemy to lose their mind, and puts them into a frenzied state. Additionally, they are afflicted with fear of the caster. Low rank Regeneration LV1, active. Damage is healed through magic. Regeneration speed and effectiveness increases. There was an option added to regeneration stating that its speed and effectiveness increased, and there was a fear option added to the Shriek of the Dead. He was excited as he wondered what kind of change this would bring upon the battlefield. However, there was something he was more excited for. It was the new skills he had gained. Honestly, most skills start at the beginner level, but both skills started at the low rank level. Low rank Harden LV1, active. Consumes mana in order to harden and strengthen the area of your choosing. You can also apply this to your weapons or armor. Oh, this is simple and precise, so it's great. Firstly, the hardened skill should be great both offensively and defensively. Especially, since it was a low rank level, it had additional options, and those options made his eyes go wide. It would reinforce his equipment, making them both stronger and sturdier. It would work as an all-purpose skill. Low rank self-destruct LV1, active. By exploding a section, or even your entire body, you inflict tremendous damage to your enemies. The damage increases geometrically the larger the area you explode. Whereas self-destruct seemed like it would be extremely difficult to use. He would die on the spot if he exploded his entire body, so who the hell would want to use this skill? At least Shin Woo possessed the invisible heart skill, so it wouldn't be so bad, but even taking that into account, it was definitely a skill with a horrific penalty. Moreover, even if I were to just explode a portion of my body, it ultimately just means that a portion of my body, which is attached to me, would explode right in front of me. He muttered like crazy, but then it hit him. A portion of the body. If that's the case, then what if he were to remove a portion of his body and then explode it? He had just the right skill for that. If I were to quickly launch my bone with my catapult skill, and then add my flames of revenge to increase the accuracy and firepower. If he were to somehow succeed in integrating those three skills, he would completely rid himself of the weakness of self-damaging himself, and it seemed like he'd be able to create a skill with the maximum explosive effect. It may be a bit dangerous, but it was worth it to test it. Shin Woo, who had been immersed in his thoughts, suddenly looked over his status and realized something new. In exchange for the "blessed by God" words being removed from his species, the moment he received low-rank acid resistance, he saw that he had received a renewed section for resistances and 2 additional resistances. Holy Max, curses, Max. How much do I have to raise the level of my skills to get to max? These 2 skills weren't new. He accurately interpreted it as the 2 resistances that he already had being openly expressed in his resistances section, something that had occurred following his level up, and the resistances section being opened up. It was much more intuitive, showing both his holy and curse resistances maxed out, rather than a vague phrase like "blessed by God." Looking at it like this, he suddenly realized just how much he had received from God. But what she took from me was equally as large. Despite him leveling up to level 3, he grit his teeth at the empty space between his legs and his bald head. What, would she only feel better if she took it all? But still, for now. Rather than getting fired up for unclear, visionless revenge, he should be focusing on his growth instead. After checking the dungeon reward, he would go to the secret shop. He would get stronger. Shin Woo, who suppressed his rage and pacified himself, closed his status and checked the area where the great slime had died again. He soon realized that something was off. There's no dungeon reward. He had already cleared several dungeons. There wasn't a single time where he wouldn't receive a dungeon reward after defeating the boss monster. Aside from what the boss itself would drop, there would always be a small wooden box that appeared. But there wasn't one. What did this mean? The conclusion was simple. Perhaps the Great Slime wasn't the dungeon boss? After thinking of that, he thought of the evidence that would back his hypothesis up one by one. When he had first entered this room, he thought it felt out of place. Now, that reason was clear. Normally, the moment a challenger shows up in the boss room, it automatically turns into a secret room, yet the Great Slime closed the door itself, which felt odd. Moreover, when he thought about it, even when he took down the Great Slime, he didn't get a message that he'd cleared the dungeon. By now, there was no room for doubt. He hadn't cleared this dungeon yet. An elite level 3 boss showed up in a level 1 dungeon, and you're saying that wasn't the main boss? Seriously? What the hell is this? Despite him already receiving a plentiful reward from the Great Slime, he was hit by a sense of frustration, feeling as though he hadn't gotten a proper reward for his efforts. And then, a piece of rationality soon returned to him. There definitely wasn't any other path, though. Shin Woo used the slimes to train, and to get the most bang for his buck, he searched the entire dungeon and killed them all. He checked all the blocked paths, and found that the passageways merged into one. Yet, if this wasn't the end of the dungeon, how would he even reach the end? Tok. Tadok. At that moment, a piece of rock fell from the wall. Since the great slime had moved around, ramming here and there, it wouldn't have been strange if the entire passageway had collapsed. However, as he thought that, he casually gazed at the wall and was dumbfounded. This crazy. He saw a tiny hole in the wall opposite the entrance, likely due to the great slime forcefully ramming and digging into it. That's right. A hole. There was definitely a room beyond that wall. Shin Woo shivered at the pitch-black darkness and the magic he felt beyond the wall. It was a concentration of magic that didn't even compare to the room he was in. He was right. The dungeon continued on. Shall we? Shin Woo checked the side of the wall that still endured, despite receiving several of the great slime's charges, and took a deep breath. How could he turn back when he made it this far? He had to find out what was beyond this wall to be satisfied. And just in time, I've come up with a great method. Shin Woo stepped away from his target, the wall, and considerably widened the distance. After that, he raised a finger and aimed for the largest crack in the wall. He utilized his Flames of Revenge skill, which could target his own body after leveling up, and a black flame ignited on his index finger. He quickly launched his finger with his catapult skill. Kwong! The catapult skill itself was amazing enough. It was as if he shot a bullet, and the index finger quickly flew towards the wall, lodging so deeply into the wall that it couldn't be seen. He saw the cracks in the wall get progressively more severe. If he just sat still like this, the flames would gradually rise and melt the wall. Of course, all of his magic would be depleted by then, so he couldn't do that. Instead, self-destruct. Shin Woo focused as much as he could on his index finger and activated his skill. He was concerned that it wouldn't work from far away or that he hadn't adapted to the skill yet, resulting in his entire body blowing up, but they were all pointless concerns. His test had succeeded. Kwong! The self-destruct skill's effect was quite amazing. Despite activating the skill by targeting his finger bone, it held an incredibly destructive power. His index finger bone, which exploded magnificently in tandem with the flames, emitted a boom and caused immense damage to the wall. The wall seemed to hold for a brief moment, but soon couldn't withstand the force and crumbled, revealing the room within for all to see. Level 1 Dungeon. You have found a secret path in the dirtied sewers. The dungeon information has been updated. Magic has increased by 1. Level 2 Elite Dungeon. You have acquired a permit for the secret sewers. All stats within the dungeon increase by 5. The dungeon information is added to your minimap. All of your actions are buffed within the dungeon. A Level 2 Elite Dungeon. He had learned about elite dungeons just a little while ago from listening to his seniors. There was a high chance that especially strong, elite-named monsters would appear, and the dungeon reward was great, but it was that much harder compared to normal dungeons. There was an extraordinary mana being exuded from beyond the opening, so he thought it wasn't a normal dungeon, but he stopped himself from being drawn in by the concentrated magic and thoughtlessly walking in. It was an entrance that he had barely found after defeating a level 3 elite monster. If he took it lightly and went in, he might get into some trouble. But still, I have to go inside. He wanted to prepare as much as possible before going inside. If one were to ask what those preparations were, there was obviously only one answer. It was the secret shop. Guten Abend, 1, Mr. Skeleton. The red-haired beauty sat behind the silver counter and was eating an orange. When she saw him, she raised her hand and waved. Shin Woo opened his eyes, he didn't have any, but that's how he felt, and asked, "In what time zone is that the standard way of greeting someone?" "That obviously depends on how I feel. You're underground, customer, so you probably don't know the time. But the passage of time differs for each region. You have at least that much general knowledge, right?" After hearing that, he suddenly felt curious. He wondered where this merchant usually stayed. Since she talked about time above ground, she might be someone who lives above ground. She might have misunderstood his gaze, as the merchant hid the orange in her hand and spoke defensively. "I'm not giving this to you. It's something that's hard to obtain in the Empire. I'm not interested, you know? Plus, I can't eat it, even if you give it to me." "Ah, right." The merchant cheerfully laughed while peeling the rest of the orange and throwing the slices in her mouth. Shin Woo promised that she'd get her just desserts someday and asked her something. It was to decide what he would do with the beginner stealth skill book that he had continuously stored in his inventory. "I acquired a skill book for a skill I've already learned, so can I sell it here? I'd recommend that you read it." "Even though I've already learned it?" "Though you've already learned the skill, the experience within each skill book differs. Your proficiency should also increase. And, unfortunately, our shop doesn't handle beginner skill books. It's such a great skill, so why?" The shopkeeper giggled and said, "It's only good when one is placed in a peculiar situation like yours, customer. Aside from you, customer, most of the other heroes are higher than level 4, so when would they have time to train the skill while fighting monsters higher than level 4? It would just add another unnecessary weakness." It was a reasonable criticism. As he shook, he meekly retrieved the skill book and opened it. He didn't really need to read it. The moment he opened the book, the contents of the book entered into his brain, fully intact. The low-rank stealth skill has become level 4. You can move without making a sound. Agility has increased by 1. It was truly frustrating that the knowledge and the experiences within the skill book were never light. Shin Woo, who had already trained and familiarized himself with the skill, was even more greatly aware of this, and by the time the skill book, which had done its job, disappeared into mana particles, the level of his skill went up. The merchant beamed, as if she already knew about it, and looked straight at him. Shin Woo felt angry, and was pointlessly curt, proposing the next order of business. "Please give me a bone. The most expensive and worthwhile bone that I can afford." You're level 3, right, customer? Level 3 bones are quite cheap, but they probably wouldn't help you right now. Then, you'd have to go up to level 4 bones, though I don't think you'd have that kind of money, customer." "Oh my, you have more than 70,000 perium already." "How?" When she checked the amount of perium he had, her eyes gleamed with what appeared to be amusement. "It's honestly not very surprising that you've leveled up to level 3 in 2 weeks since being dropped into the Empire. If we consider the power that you were given, we can say that you're talented. However, the total amount of money you gathered in that short period of time, as well as your invisible heart which has stopped at level 3. Customer, you're a bit interesting. I knew you thought I was interesting the first time you saw me, though." The skeleton replied, uninterested. She burst out into an even greater laughter and clapped. And then she made an extremely unexpected offer. "Very good. I've become interested in your story. Would you like to tell me about your experiences until now? Are you going to give me something? I wasn't planning on just hearing about your experiences for free. I'll reduce the price of your item by 20,000 perium. Please sit down." In exchange for telling his story, she would cut down the price of the transaction by 20,000 perium, so he had no reason to refuse. He immediately straightened his neck and faced her. Her red eyes glowed, as if there were magic within them. She looked like she couldn't hold back her anticipation. Damn it, she's extremely pretty. It wasn't a problem that she was a beauty. The problem was that he didn't feel uneasy whatsoever when facing such a beauty. So in the beginning, Shin Woo started his story with those dismal feelings. He precisely and concisely picked out the central parts of his story, from the moment he ended up in the Empire, to now. "So, I ended up finding the path that leads to a level 2 elite dungeon and decided to drop by here." "Who, indeed?" The merchant breathed out, seemingly expressing satisfaction, and opened her mouth. "That guile, that composure. Above all, your obsession over your life has caused a change, customer. Even though you possess 100 lives, to think you'd place so much value on each and every one of them. Even God probably wouldn't have been able to predict this. Yes. By doing so, you became a new trickster customer. Is that really important? It is important. You're walking a path which no one else can walk in this world where everything is decided by karma. Moreover, you've already acquired 8 tokens at this stage? Ha! You're interesting. Really interesting. I don't feel like the perium has gone to waste. She clapped her hands and nodded her head. Shin Woo felt like he had become an entertainer somewhere and asked her a question. If this information gets leaked to the others, it won't happen. I double as an informant, but your information will not be leaked to anyone else, aside from me, and will be kept a secret. Even if that person is another hero. That's a relief. And it was also beneficial that he'd learned that she doubled as an informant. Right now, he didn't have any problems as he had a lot of things to do right now, but further along the line, if his progress were to be blocked, it wouldn't be bad to pay her perium in exchange for her advice. When they were completely finished with their talk, Shin Woo went on to the next matter. If you're satisfied, you're going to reduce the price by 20,000 perium, right? I said I'm not a trickster, so I'll settle the deal fairly. Here, I've picked out the most expensive bones that you can buy with 91,130 perium. She took out 2 bones, one by one, from underneath the counter, and laid them atop the counter. One of them was a blue bone, and the other was a red bone. When he saw those 2 bones, he didn't know what to say. With a discount of 20,000 perium, the red bone costs 67,510 perium, and the blue bone costs 71,040 perium. To think I'd have to pick between 2 bones again. There's a limit to bad taste. Moreover, though the colors are the same as last time, the levels are different, and they're bones from a completely different monster. Shin Woo, while firmly grinding his teeth, checked the prices first. If he bought the blue bone, he would be left with 92 perium, and was pissed since it was similar to last time. You obviously can't tell me what monster it came from, right? Of course. If you were to buy a cheaper bone, you could check the information right after, but would you like to do that? Though I wouldn't recommend it. The merchant didn't hide her intent and snickered. Perhaps she had offered the 20,000 perium discount in order to present these 2 bones at the same time and to piss him off. Shin Woo meticulously inspected the exterior of the 2 bones. He couldn't differentiate them by their hardness alone, and the magic coming from them as well. Wait a second, magic? Ho. When Shin Woo concentrated deeply on the 2 bones, the merchant looked amused. You're honestly a bit surprising. To think you'd awaken such aptitude in magic from just the experience you acquired from that bone last time. Oh my! It seems like you already can't hear what I'm saying. There was magic in all the bones he'd acquired until now. It was just that the tendency of that magic changed. When the bones contained a pure, deep magic, he would gain magic stat points, but if there was a different, complex power within, he could gain other stats as well. While it was alive, the owner of the bone had a special power, and that special power was wrapped in magic. Through bone reinforcement, that lock was removed, and it felt like that power was transferred to me intact. Of course, even if he didn't know what monster the bones in front of him belonged to, he had absorbed hundreds, if not thousands of bones that raised various stats. Though he didn't know about the skills, he felt like he could read the pattern of the magic that changed depending on which stat it would raise. Low-rank magic affinity has become LV4. Magic has increased by 3. Yeah, I feel like I know now. Of course, since they were both level 4 bones, the amount and quality of the mana differed compared to the other bones he had acquired, and the pattern boasted a complexity on another level to those that came before, but, still, he could read the flow of mana within, and when he exerted himself, he was able to intuitively grasp the abilities of the bones. The red bone is clearly from a warrior, or something similar. I can probably gain strength and health from that one. The blue bone is, honestly, purely magic. It's a magician. To think that they'd really be divided based on color. He didn't need to think about it complicatedly. Both the red bone and the blue bone would reveal their owner's power and characteristics. The red magic corresponded to strength and health, while the blue magic was entirely focused on magic and emitted light. Between the two, the one I need the most right now is. Right now, when the level 2 elite dungeon is right ahead of him, which ability should he increase? If he were to just look at his stats, he should leave his excessively grown magic stat, and it seemed like procuring strength and health was a good choice. Moreover, acquiring the warrior's skill was appealing. However, I'll go with the blue bone. Despite all that, Shin Woo chose the blue bone, which would further increase the imbalance among his stats. He honestly thought that there wasn't any other choice but the blue bone. Whether it be the regeneration skill that he had made good use of in this dungeon, or the hardened skill that he'd have to concentrate on and train, or the flames of revenge, etc. Using all these various skills necessitated him using mana. So, for Shin Woo, who considered training his skills as important as gaining stats, there was honestly no other choice from the very beginning. Haha. Does it seem like I'll say something? But it seemed like the merchant was satisfied with his decision. She smiled brightly, grabbing the red bone and returning it, and passed the blue bone to him. Shin Woo slightly tilted his head towards the inquiring merchant. Are you saying it was an excellent choice? Yes, you're right. You made a really, really good decision. You may be the greatest trickster that God has created. Ever since Shin Woo had divided the two bones based on their magic, she had been continuously smiling, and that smile only further deepened now. Magic is the basis for all strength. It's fine, so long as it's not an amount that the body cannot withstand, causing the body to break. Since you can do the rest with magic anyway. I'm talking about strengthening the body, as well as its changes. This is especially important to you, customer, who has opened your eyes to magic at an early stage. As he listened to her, Shin Woo had a hunch. He could heal his shattered body through regeneration, and the hardened skill he had just received could strengthen his body. So, there should be another skill that lets him reinforce his body in a different way. Of course, strength, agility, and health were the fundamental abilities that influenced the body, and they were certainly important stats, but even when combining the three, magic was more important. Thank you. I've received your payment of 71,040 perium. Then, I'll get going now. I'll come back faster next time and get that red bone, so please wait for me. Ah, please wait just a minute. He didn't regret his decision, but he still had a lingering attachment to that red bone. He spoke the lines that retreating enemy troops would say, and when he was about to leave, the merchant grabbed him. I haven't properly heard your name yet, customer. My name is Shin Woo. He thought that the merchant would have already known his name by now, but Shin Woo obediently told her his name. Shin Woo would see her a lot in the future, so he thought it'd be better to formally introduce himself. My name is Plain. As you can see, I'm responsible for the secret shop. Then I'll see you next time, Plain. I hope you'll come and see me when you've become stronger. It wasn't just his imagination that the merchant. Plain seemed to be kinder to him than before. And that was all because he had personally proven his potential. The greatest virtue on this planet was none other than strength. He suddenly realized that fact. Smiling bitterly, he left the secret shop. He then returned to the clearing, in front of the dark, lengthy passageway. Who, then? Since he roughly knew the result, he didn't shake that much. After Shin Woo had briefly grasped that there was no danger in his periphery, he boldly activated his bone reinforcement. He somehow figured out that it was a part of something else, and it was actually part of the skull, the sphenoid bone. Reinforcing the sphenoid bone. Your compatibility with the target is incredibly high and you have acquired a skill with great success. Magic has increased by 24. You are more deeply absorbing experiences and memories. Hey, wait. Shin Woo, who realized that the activation of the skill was different from last time, hurriedly tried to gesture, but it was obviously to no avail. An enormous amount of information and a clear consciousness entered his brain, and for a short time, his consciousness was completely locked away. And the appearance of another world unfolded. Chapter 7. By the time Shin Woo got a hold of himself, he was in a bright interior, rather than the sewers. It was as if he were in a dream, as the surrounding landscape looked blurry, and he couldn't move his body as he wished. Though he was able to indirectly experience the feeling of a human's body, he wasn't very happy. Yes, he was looking through a certain human's memories. It was a moment where he once again felt the endless abilities of bone reinforcement. "I'm here, teacher." Those words came out of his own mouth. That person, whose body was permeated with Shin Woo's consciousness, spoke those words and raised his head. For the first time, he saw someone else in the room. He was really old, frail, and even the mana within him wasn't anything special. "Teacher? But this guy seems like he's way stronger." Since he was within this person's body, he knew for sure. Shin Woo had just become level 3 and possessed an ample amount of magic, yet this guy had much more mana than himself. He was obviously a higher level than him and had probably focused on his growth in magic. Whereas the strength of the old man before him wasn't even at the level of a skeleton warrior. If they were to quibble over mana, the old man had about half of Shin Woo's mana. Normally, Shin Woo didn't have the ability to precisely measure someone else's mana, but it was possible for the person who he was inhabiting. "Jarrett, why have you come? I have something I must tell you." Of course, since they had a teacher-student relationship, strength probably wasn't that important. They don't say that the student surpasses the master for nothing. For starters, Shin Woo decided he'd listen to their conversation. "I have nothing to hear from you. Teacher, I heard you've become responsible for a group that's researching under His Majesty's supervision. Where did you hear about that? That's not important. What's important is that what you're doing is wrong." Ah, as expected. When he thought about it, the last time he reinforced his skull, he remembered hearing about research of some kind. He had roughly guessed what it was, but this memory made it clear what the research was. It was the research that would fill this empire with the undead. "Teacher, you must stop that research at once. It's research that's twisted at its very core. Bringing immortality within everyone's reach will bring nothing more than ruin. But that's what His Majesty wants. Isn't it you who had told me that this research was wrong? Teacher, please tell me honestly. Who's the one who really wants immortality? Is it His Majesty? Or..." Around now, Shin Woo started to feel like he was watching a movie. The empire had fallen anyway, so there was no need to be on the edge of his seat. He watched their conversation extremely comfortably. Meanwhile, it seemed as though their argument was reaching its climax. "Ha! Yes, one born with genius such as you wouldn't understand what it feels like to lack in natural ability and be unable to proceed to the next stage. You don't know how wretched it feels. I just practiced as you taught me, teacher. Then why couldn't I reach that level?" Suddenly, the old man's temper flared. It felt as though it had built up more and more and had finally exploded. "I lack in talent, in magic, and in everything. I can't get to level 3 before I die. Karma. I don't have enough karma. At least, if I don't buy more time. And yet, why are you voluntarily trying to shoulder the burden of the horrific karma that you vehemently rejected in the past? At the time, you were the one I respected the most. You don't know. You, who has everything, wouldn't know what it feels like." The old man suddenly screamed. But Shin Woo thought he had heard that voice somewhere before, and then, a truly shocking development occurred. The teacher had been delivering his impassioned speech, and suddenly, one of his eyes popped out and rolled onto the floor. "What the... That wasn't all." The teacher suddenly vomited rotten blood and bowed his head. His student, Jarrett, had a hunch that something had gone terribly wrong, but the moment he was about to retreat, his teacher raised his head and suddenly attacked him. The teacher's eyes had turned yellow and had a dull glow. It was like the standard development for a zombie. Kayak. What the hell? Jarrett realized that his teacher, who had sought immortality, had instantly become an existence furthest from life. He had changed into an undead. He quickly diagnosed whether he could turn his teacher back to normal or not, but soon shook his head and extended his hand. Ooh! In a brief instance, the world's mana responded to his call, and he instantly created a net comprised of mana, trapping his teacher. It was the stage that his teacher had so fervently desired to reach. Shin Woo felt it across his entire body and was deeply touched. So this was how you handled mana. He could energetically feel it all. How Jarrett had manifested his will in that brief moment. How he drew out the mana within his body, and how he caused change in the mana. Kyahak. Kyahak. Damn it, teacher. His teacher, who had transformed into a zombie, also raised his mana and struggled. But when Jarrett grit his teeth and flicked his finger, the mana net changed into flames and began to magnificently burn his teacher. When he released the flames, all that remained was a small blue bone. Damn it, what the hell did those bastards do to him? The sole survivor, Jarrett, persistently grit his teeth, muttered, and picked up the bone fragment. The mana that arose from his body almost acted as proof of his rage. I can't let this insanity go on any longer. I have to protect the Empire at all costs. To do that, damn it. Jarrett chewed on his lips. Whereas Shin Woo was concentrating so desperately in order to further engrave Jarrett's high-level mana control into his mind that he couldn't feel sympathy for him. In the end, I have no choice but to meet with General Sigald. It's Sigald again. He couldn't help but retort when he heard about General Sigald. However, Shin Woo hoped that he would explain what Sigald did, though unfortunately his hope was dashed, as that was the last thing he heard before his consciousness became faint. It was as if someone decided that these were all the experiences and memories that he could receive, and cut it short. His sight turned dark, and his own senses gradually returned to him. Back to the senses of his cold, hard bone body. TCH. Low-rank magic affinity has become LV7. Magic has increased by 10. You have learned the passive skill, low-rank magic accumulation. Magic has increased by 5. You can draw your mana naturally, and by amassing it within your body, your total amount of magic increases, and by doing so, your body will harmonize with your mana better than before. The moment Shin Woo completely awakened within the sewers, he received concise and amazing messages one after another. He rubbed his non-existent eyes. His magic affinity had leveled up and he had acquired a new skill, a really important one at that. He had learned a skill that was essential in handling magic, and the magic affinity skill had sharply increased, so he could say that he had no regrets, but the name, Sigald, weighed on his mind, so he couldn't feel happy about his growth. Since I keep hearing his name, he must have really been an influential figure in the Empire. He briefly pondered over it, but soon opened the chatting channel. It should be all right to ask his seniors about Sigald just once. He was famous enough for the skeletons to say his name in their death throes, so there should be someone amongst them that knew who he was. Shin Woo, seniors, may I ask a question? Yasunori Akira, the newbie, huh? It's good that you're not dead. Shin Woo, haha. It was something that he took as a greeting whenever he entered the chatting channel. It meant it was that hard to survive in this empire. He smiled bitterly and started to speak. Shin Woo, have you perhaps heard of the name Sigald? Yasunori Akira. Ah, it does seem like I might have heard that somewhere. Lloyd HK, I've heard of him. He's one of the generals, right? From what I've heard, it seems like there were 12 generals in this empire. Shino Rendu, have you cleared the dungeon? That's a relief. Lloyd HK. Because you worried about me, I was able to safely clear the dungeon. Prince Altania. Whoever he was, that Sigald guy must have been really popular. The lower ranked the skeleton, the more fervently they talk about him. Sarah von Redadane, Sigald. He's probably an undead right now as well. He's our enemy. Prince Altania, that's obvious. As expected, it seems like his seniors had heard about Sigald before. Though he did feel disappointed that he couldn't get any additional information on him from them. Shin Woo clicked his tongue and Sarah asked him a question. Sarah von Redadane, however, Mr. Shin Woo. Do you perhaps have a reason for asking about Sigald? Shin Woo. Ah, like my other seniors, I've heard a lot about this Sigald guy from the skeletons. I was just curious as to who he was. Sarah von Rededane, I see. However, Mr. Lee Shin Woo, regarding that person. When Sarah was about to say something more, something happened. Ms. Yi Jin Jin has entered. Yi Jin Jin, please save me. Somebody please save me. Lee Shin Woo stiffened at the sudden call for help, but his seniors clicked their tongues, as if they were used to it. Lloyd HK. Damn it. I'd thought it had been too long for everyone to come out unscathed. Prince Altania. Rest in peace, Yi Jin Jin. If I see you later, I'll make sure to burn you to a crisp. Yi Jin Jin, you're too much. I am going to die. GGYAHK. A zombie. It's a huge zombie. Aryan Ruparte. Jin Jin, where are you? Where are you right now? I need to know where you are if you want me to help. Sarah von Rededane. It's no use, Ruparte. God really values us, and if we're close enough to help, a quest will occur, even without her call for help. Aryan Ruparte. And no. Then are you saying we just have to sit here and watch her die? Shino Rendu. We've already seen several dozens of heroes dying from here. We have a lot of regrets and remorse. You should just shut up if you're going to talk about responsibility or having a conscience so lightly. Aryan Ruparte. That's. In an instant, the mood in the chatting channel calmed down exceedingly. The seniors who got along well with her were distressed, and even those speaking curtly couldn't hide their pity for her. Lee Shin Woo understood all of them, and he even understood those who remained silent. Lloyd HK. Sorry I couldn't save you, Yi Jin Jin. Yi Jin Jin. Please save me. Please. However, their mood didn't match Lee Shin Woo at all. Even though a human being was on the verge of death, they're not even uneasy? Was it because he also felt contempt for himself, since he was also like them? Since he was suddenly starting to be unsure of his own identity? They were all right, but they were also all wrong. A quest has occurred. Hero rescue. A hero close by you is in a life-threatening crisis. If you succeed in perfectly rescuing her, you will acquire a suitable reward. Of course, if you fail or ignore her call, there won't be anyone who blames you, but there may be those who mock you and say that you are foolish. Quest reward: 3 permits to God's secret shop, 1 random skill book, acquisition of a suitable amount of stats and parium, and LV3 equipment reinforcement permits based on your contributions. That's right. It seems like this girl was nearby. Lee Shin Woo accepted the quest, left the clearing and approached the sewer's ceiling. He had gone through the entire sewers over and over again for several days, so he knew the structure of the sewers well. There were other ways besides the official entrance to get into the dungeon, so the opposite was also true. Good, as I expected, there's a crack. He used his bone of thunder lasting to shatter a drain pipe. No matter how tough the drain pipe was, it wouldn't be able to endure a hardened LV3 weapon's power slash. Qua. A heap of dirt spilled out and fell, but Lee Shin Woo didn't let it bother him. It had been a long time since these sewers had lost their original purpose. He wasn't going to complain just because of some dirt. It shouldn't be blocked to the point that I won't be able to come back, right? Of course, it didn't matter, even if it were blocked. He would just break through it and go on his merry way. Like right now. He returned his weapon, and like a mole, violently dug through the dirt and procured a route to the surface. He couldn't have even dreamed of doing this when he was still human, but since he was an undead that didn't need to breath now, it was quite simple. Since the sewers weren't that deep, he was able to escape rather quickly. Who? Lee Shin Woo, who had gotten outside, sensed a huge presence straight in front of him. Would it take around 2 minutes by running? It was a distance close enough that could be seen with the naked eye. A black-haired Asian girl was in the middle of running hectically. Behind her, a huge 3-meter giant undead was quickly chasing her. LV4 Acid Ghoul, Edward L. Baker. You have found the target of your revenge. When you initiate battle, all abilities increase by 20%. Flames of Revenge receive an additional 20% increase. Ha, really? The one he had encountered, and succeeded in barely running away from was none other than that giant zombie. Moreover, it had grown to become a level 4 ghoul. Human. It's been a long time since I've seen a human possessing such appetizing flesh. Gyok. Save me. Though its body was smaller than the last time, considering how the acid poison it spread was getting stronger and stronger, as well as how its movement speed seemed faster than a normal monster's, it was certain that it had leveled up. He had thought that it wasn't a normal monster, but why did it have to be the one to rise to level 4? And why did it have to be the one attacking another hero? Should I run away? Shin Woo naturally thought. However, he soon shook his head. It wasn't because he pitied the girl, who was weeping and ran while dragging her injured leg. It wasn't sympathy, contempt, goodwill, or regret either. Rather, he didn't feel anything for the girl, to the point that he felt like he'd start feeling contempt for himself. He would have readily helped her if it wasn't very difficult, but it was also a situation where he didn't really want to actively help her. It made him realize that he was a completely different person from before. Despite that, there was only one reason why he couldn't easily back down. He coveted this quest reward so much that he was ready to sacrifice a life or two to get it. Moreover, I have the Avenger skill right now, as well as the Flames of Revenge. All of his abilities increased by 20%, so even though the zombie had amplified its stats by reaching level 4, he thought it was definitely worth a shot. He hadn't been aware that the Avenger skill would additionally buff his Flames of Revenge skill, which was a happy miscalculation. He had procured a surefire way of inflicting damage to it. Moreover, the fact that it was a monster that used acid poison was another reason that made Shin Woo so bold. He had already cleared the slime's den and come out, and in the process, his acid poison resistance had gotten to the low rank level. He was sure he wouldn't be helpless against its acid poison this time. Now that his mind was made up, there was only one problem left. Can I take care of this issue without exposing my identity to that girl? Ideally, he would act as an aloof skeleton knight who wandered around following the collapse of the Empire. He would take care of the acid ghoul, receive the quest reward, and leave worry-free. He wasn't sure if that would actually work, but for starters, Shin Woo decided to run with that concept for now. Of course, even if he is exposed, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. He was an undead, but it was undeniable that he was also a hero. He had all the evidence in the world to prove that he was one. All right, then. Shin Woo finished all of his calculations and raised his index finger. A black flame wrapped around his finger and softly burned. He carefully raised his finger and aimed at the acid ghoul, whose heavy feet stomped onto the floor, and ran quickly. Perhaps it was by chance, or perhaps it was necessity, but the girl was running towards him, and because of that, it became much easier to aim at the ghoul. Ready. Aim. Fire. His index finger was launched, accompanied by a simple, short, and powerful pain. The black flame engulfed the index finger and it went afar, faster than any bullet. It cut through the air, advanced, and burrowed into the ghoul's shoulder. TCH. Shin Woo briefly clicked his tongue. It was obvious, but he had originally aimed for its head. Of course, even if he had hit its head, he probably wouldn't have taken it down in one hit, but he was disappointed it didn't work out. Goo Woo. An undead. But that attack just now. While Shin Woo was busy complaining, the ghoul, as well as the girl, inspected him. The ghoul shrieked, filled with pain and anger, and the girl was incredibly flustered at the unprecedented sight of an undead attacking another undead. Oh, GG yuck. Because of that, she sprained her ankle and fell to the floor. That dumbass. Human. Eating. Rather than punish the skeleton that attacked it, it seemed like the ghoul decided to eat the human in front of it first. Shin Woo inwardly wanted to get rid of her right now, and exploded the index finger burrowed in its shoulder. Gok. Ujik. Yuk. Huguk. The effect was amazing. The ghoul was about to grab the girl's head with its rough arm, but its shoulder joint burst. It wasn't able to endure the horrific pain and stood in place, roaring in pain. Whereas it seemed like the girl had realized that she had just escaped death, and even while crying, desperately moved her body and escaped the ghoul. She had already been afflicted by its acid poison, so about half of her clothes had been melted, and she truly wasn't dressed decently. However, Shin Woo wasn't agitated by that at all. It should have been alright if he'd been a little uneasy, though. Kawa. Annoying. A mere skeleton. Geez, you burn well. It's hot enough to cook a sweet potato. The satisfying result of his attack soothed his regret of losing something important. It was because above the ghoul's tattered shoulder joint, the clear black flames still blazed on, and gnawed at the ghoul. He knew it was an amazing combination, but he didn't think it'd be this effective. If he could repeatedly use this technique from afar, whether it be an acid ghoul or anything else, they would die all the same. Annoying guy, die. TCH. However, that was still only the ideal situation. There was no way that his opponent would take that kind of horrific pain and idiotically stay put. The acid ghoul seemed to be really pissed, as it even let the appetizing human go, and sprinted at full speed towards him. Shin Woo ascertained its speed, as well as the direction it was going, and raised his other hand's index finger, which he had already ignited with the flames of revenge, aimed, and fired. Firing again. Kyahik. But surprisingly, the ghoul swiftly swung its arm and parried the shot, as if he were waiting for it. Of course, the flames of revenge excellently shifted to its arm, attached to it, and began burning it, but he hadn't gotten an opportunity to explode his shot. It just miserably bounced off, and rolled onto the floor. Shin Woo saw that, and though he had roughly expected it, he clicked his tongue. TCH, well, it is a level 4. It had a much faster reaction speed than a normal zombie, and the durability of its body was different as well. In a scenario where the ghoul noticed him, and he wanted to fight it using catapult, he felt like he'd need to be at least level 5. The fact that he'd gotten the first hit in was a tremendous success. Now I have to fight it off myself. In preparation for the coming ghoul, he regenerated both of his fingers, and tightly gripped the bone of thunder lasting. He activated Harden, applying it to both his sword and his armor, and even ignited the flames of revenge on his sword. Even so, he still had mana to spare. If it was before, it wouldn't have been strange for close to half of my mana to have been drained by now, but right now, my mana's overflowing. Since he'd strengthened himself with Jarrett's sphenoid bone, Shin Woo's magic was at 173. Moreover, his low-rank magic affinity had risen to level 7, and he obtained the low-rank level 1 magic accumulation. Even at this very moment, the two skills were drawing the surrounding mana towards him and replenishing his mana. So at least in terms of mana, there was a world of difference between him today and him yesterday. You are exposed to the acid ghoul's strengthened acid poison. Low-rank acid resistance is mitigating the damage. I'll crush you, skeleton. While he was busy preparing for the battle, the ghoul had gotten really close. Its acid poison had become even more fearsome than before, and Shin Woo, feeling as though his entire body would be melted away, had attacked first. Though it was actually bearable due to his acid resistance. He prayed that his armor would last until the end of the battle, and activated his skill. Power slash. D. The ghoul's sharp nails and the bone of thunder lasting clashed. Immediately after the horrific shriek, Shin Woo's body was mercilessly pushed back. In the ground, there were traces of 2 deep lines. Joyuk. You're weak. Skeleton. Despite using Power Slash, the strength behind Shin Woo's strike couldn't match up to the ghoul's. It was obvious. Even though his strength was counterbalanced by the amplification effect of his Avenger skill, he still couldn't contest a level 4 as a level 3 with purely stats. Moreover, this asshole seems to have especially high strength. Shin Woo gripped his sword with both hands, whereas the ghoul extended one hand, so he was even more shocked. He grit his teeth and attempted to parry its arm, but its forearm was as hard as steel. The flame blazing on his sword shifted to its arm, attached to it, and began to burn it, but he couldn't defeat the ghoul with just that degree of pain. The flames on its shoulder were gradually expanding, so now it looked like some sort of flame giant. Eek. Power SLA. Not a chance. Shin Woo pushed its arm away, and tried to use his power slash again, but the ghoul used its other arm to smash him, like a straw cutter. Shin Woo, who used his combat sprint to seize that split-second opportunity, swiftly retreated both his body and sword, and rolled onto the floor. Instead, the ghoul's arm burst open the innocent ground and sank into it. It was truly a horrific, destructive power. To think you'd get away! Die. I'm telling you. To die. Damn it, since it became level 4, our levels are worlds apart. It seems like it's at least 300 stats higher than me. How the hell am I supposed to win? Shin Woo evaded its next attack and had to consecutively back away. By simply swinging its arms, the ground was hollowed out, forming small craters. When he saw that, before fear, he just felt astonished. It was a relief that it wasn't very hard to dodge them. Kawak. You rat? A mere skeleton without a bit of flesh. Then are you that slow due to you having all that flesh? Oh, boy. Kujiad. The ghoul truly had tremendous strength and health, but it wasn't very fast. The fact that Shin Woo was able to dodge its attacks was proof of that. However, he couldn't just move around dodging this guy forever. You are being exposed to the acid ghoul's strengthened acid poison. Low-rank acid resistance has become LV2. My armor's steadily melting away. I won't last long like this. He had applied both his hardened skill, as well as his acid resistance to his armor, yet the condition of his armor wasn't good. It was due to already having fought the Great Slime. If it kept going like this, his armor wouldn't even last a few more minutes and would disappear without a trace. Damn it. At the end of his brief pondering, he put his armor into his inventory. Even if he were to die once, he couldn't afford to lose his armor in a place like this. Kyahik, Kyahahik. The ghoul saw Shin Woo de-equip his armor, and even as its hands consecutively floundered in the air, it laughed. Though he didn't know what it was so happy about, the ghoul's body was being gradually burned by the flames of revenge. He didn't know if the ghoul realized that it was in the exact same position as he was. Now it's become us both having time bombs set up, and we're just waiting for whoever's time bomb goes off first. Shin Woo, even while furrowing his non-existent brow, decided to make his next move. It was none other than himself who made up his mind to finish this quest, even if he had to risk his life to do so. This was the time to stake his life. Even though he knew its body was damn tough, or that it was extremely strong, he needed to get one hit in with his sword. Kwong! Gek! Something forcefully hit the acid ghoul, causing it to miserably roll onto the floor. Shin Woo, who had charged at it, stiffened in place. I'll help you. The one who had struck the acid ghoul and appeared in its place was a skeleton horse, and it spoke with eyes ablaze with blue goblin fire. Its voice was neither low nor high, but simply just a charming, beautiful voice. The skeleton horse spoke in that beautiful voice, so he thought there was a considerable disparity between them, but when he thought about it, he wasn't in much of a different situation. To think there'd be another undead hero like me. It's really nice to meet you. Shin Woo was speechless when he heard the skeleton horse continue, and kept his mouth shut. He had, at some point, heard about a skeleton horse in the chatting channel, a horse that just kept running within the confines of the underground empire, and the stories regarding the skeleton horse had coursed through his head. Yeah, his seniors were right. There was no way that an undead wouldn't attack humans and would just keep running. Ellipsis. If they weren't a hero, that is. A skeleton and a skeleton horse. Both of them were heroes at that. They definitely had much to say to the other. What the hell did you ask God for, or were you perhaps a horse to start, etc. However, it wasn't the best situation for them to introduce themselves. Shin Woo suppressed the urge to grab hold of and interrogate it, and he spoke simply to the skeleton horse, which, probably, looked at him as if it wanted something. Thanks for helping. Shall we talk about the rest after taking that bastard down? All right. The skeleton horse's reply seemed slightly anxious, but he didn't have time to be concerned about that. Right now, the only thing Shin Woo was sure about was that the skeleton horse had equal strength to the ghoul, such that it could ram into it and send it flying. There wasn't a more dependable ally than a level 4. Kuga. Again, you're nothing but bones. Meanwhile, the ghoul, which had rolled onto the ground from the skeleton horse's kick, realized the identity of its attacker and seemed to become extremely angry. However, the moment its temper flared and it tried to upright its body, Shin Woo used his catapult. His index finger flew and burrowed deep into the ghoul's forearm. Right as the ghoul opened its eyes wide, the finger exploded. Go now, attack. Kahak. Shin Woo aimed for the moment the ghoul rolled onto the floor again, and activated his combat sprint, quickly advancing towards it. Through his self-destruct, about half of its forearm was severed, and he followed up by striking its other half with his bone of thunder lasting. It was a power slash backed by bursting thunder. It looked akin to a blue streak of lightning. Critical hit. Kuok. No matter how far apart their levels, the ghoul wouldn't come out unscathed after receiving a catapult, self-destruct, and the following power slash. As soon as its tough and sturdy forearm rolled onto the floor, it screamed awfully. Eek! Die! The skeleton horse rushed over and kicked it once again. It didn't seem like it had used a skill, but since it had rushed over frighteningly quickly, despite the short distance, its attack power was considerable. Why is it so clumsy? Shin Woo had consumed countless skeleton and monster bones, leveled up, and gained their combat abilities, so from his point of view, the skeleton horse moved crudely, even when considering the difference in species. Moreover, after its preemptive attack, it looked distressed as the acid ghoul's blood splattered, which was mixed with acid poison. He definitely looked like a newbie. Wait, high-leveled heroes could be newbies. Moreover, since there's no way that it used to be a horse, it may be natural that it hasn't gotten used to its body yet. He decided he would calmly talk this over after the battle's conclusion. In any case, toppling the acid ghoul was his top priority. Shin Woo yelled at the skeleton horse, which was going for another attack even while suffering from the ghoul's acid poison. Stay back for now, unless you have a skill or equipment that repels acid poison. But I'm not telling you to run away. When I ask you, attack him then. Got it. Fortunately, the skeleton horse meekly obeyed Shin Woo and retreated. He wouldn't have an answer if someone unskilled decided to be stubborn, but it seemed like he had avoided the worst-case scenario. You ridiculous bastards, I'll crush you into powder. Right then, the ghoul stood up. It gripped its severed arm with its other hand and dangerously swung it. Whenever it swung it, a thicker acid poison spread out. It was mixed with the blazing flames on its entire body, so it gave off a smoky smell. You have been intensively exposed to the acid ghoul's strengthened acid poison. Though low-rank acid resistance is lessening the damage, it seems like it is not very effective. Yeah, I'll cut off your other arm for you soon. A mere feeble skeleton. Even while saying that, the ghoul seemed to regard Shin Woo as a much more dangerous opponent than his exterior appearance might suggest, and moved warily. To the point that he felt as though its combat experience when it was alive was immense, especially because it swung its arm as a weapon, and stayed a reasonable distance away. Hey! However, thinking like that was a miscalculation. It aimed for that split second where Shin Woo couldn't move hastily, and shoved the arm in its hand into its gigantic mouth. Kua! You crazy! Shin Woo, who realized at that moment that the ghoul's mana had increased explosively, regretted that he hadn't already severed its other arm. Then again, he obviously couldn't afford to, nor did he have the time to do so before. You dirty bastard! I'm a ghoul, you stupid skeleton! Just because it ate its arm didn't mean that another arm would grow in its place. However, the moment it swallowed its own arm, the skin which had been blazing with the flames of revenge, immediately returned to its normal state, and not only that, his other remaining arm swelled fatly. It naturally felt as though the ghoul's strength had increased a level. You asshole! You're not even a boss, yet you're starting the second phase. Die! After it finished consuming its arm, the ghoul charged at Shin Woo. It was astonishingly fast, so much so that it was incomparable to before. Shin Woo didn't act with reckless bravado, and immediately activated his combat sprint. However, when he thought he'd gotten far enough away, the ghoul's arm strangely lengthened and smashed him. Ugh! Kya hahik. This is where it seized the momentum. It pursued Shin Woo, who was rolling on the floor, and attacked him again. Die! Break! TCH! Q-hit! Shin Woo trusted his intuition and rolled onto the floor, avoiding the ghoul's arm, which it swung like a whip. Though whenever its arm crashed into the ground, the wildly spurting acid poison was indirectly melting his body. Low-rank acid resistance has become LV3. The fact that his low-rank acid resistance, which had risen to low rank just a little while ago, was leveling up, proved just how extreme his environment was. However, the situation wasn't great, so he couldn't be happy about the skill leveling up. Shin Woo regenerated his body while out of breath and grit his teeth. Maintaining his flames of revenge was continuously taxing his mana, and now, he didn't really have much mana to spare. Should I call the skeleton horse now? No, he'll just get even more hurt. Then, it was time to use the method he had been saving to turn the situation around. Shin Woo mentally braced himself again and kicked off the floor, using his combat sprint. He leapt up into the air as the acid ghoul's arm came flying towards him. He activated Harden, applying it to both of his arms, and held tightly onto the arm. Hoot! The acid ghoul seemed to think that Shin Woo had given up his life, as it sported a wicked smile, and pulled him towards it. Despite him activating his hardened skill, his arms started to gradually melt, but he didn't have any intention of using regeneration. He calmly waited for the moment he got close. The moment the ghoul was sure of its victory was the best time for a comeback. Good. In exchange for a life, he'll grab hold of victory. Aight. This timing again. However, when Shin Woo had resolved himself, someone else interfered. To be exact, a javelin quickly cut through the air and pierced the acid ghoul's arm. Kuwak! The effect was amazing! The spear burrowed deep into the ghoul's arm, and when the acid ghoul contracted its arm, it was tormented by a horrific pain, due to the deep tear wound. It was really impressive, especially when the sharp mana at the tip of the spear impacted the ghoul and spread everywhere. Ha! Kuwak! While Shin Woo stood in awe, another javelin holding mana flew and burrowed into the ghoul's arm. It was a speed and accuracy that gave him goosebumps. When he figured out who had thrown the javelins, he laughed forcefully. Yi Jin Jin? It was none other than Yi Jin Jin. He thought she had run off on her own since he hadn't seen her, but she hadn't. Who? She was still wearing rags instead of clothes, and she looked as though she would immediately collapse and start crying at any time, but she pursed her lips and endured. After that, she prepared to throw another javelin, and it actually didn't seem like she was going to run away. He honestly looked again. Even when rotten, it's still a herring. At least at this very moment, her gaze befitted that of a hero. Pray, where do you think you're going? Now that it's become like this, the situation's changed. There was the skeleton horse, while sloppy, which possessed a level 4's strength, as well as the coward that was only level 3, but was a hero with a talent in throwing. He had a chance of winning now without giving up one of his precious lives. Hub. Kuhik. Beginner power / has become LV8. The activation speed of the skill has become faster. Before he was flung to the ground, Shin Woo exerted all his strength to twist its arm and then rolled onto the ground. He wondered whether he could utilize power / with his body as well, so he had tried it, and it seemed like he had half succeeded. You insect! How dare you! Hoot! Hey you! Why yes! Shin Woo avoided the infuriated acid ghoul's acid poison particles and retreated, calling out to the hero, Yi Jin Jin. He couldn't pretend like he couldn't talk at this point, and he didn't have a reason not to either. It seemed as though Yi Jin Jin didn't think she was in a position to discriminate about this or that, as she obediently responded. How many more times can you shoot that? 2 more times. If I give a location, shoot it right away. Yes. I won't let you. Ha! Perhaps the spears were quite painful, as it immediately aggroed onto Yi Jin Jin. It even ignored Li Shin Woo and ran towards Yi Jin Jin, but Li Shin Woo directly blocked its path. On his left raised hand, a black flame blazed. "Why don't you try blocking this one?" "Not a chance." Li Shin Woo's finger trembled, and the instant he made the motion for his catapult, the ghoul appeared to perfectly read its trajectory and swung its arm. However, it didn't feel anything ever touch its hand. Kua. It was a fake, you dumbass. The moment that the ghoul felt quizzical, Li Shin Woo was already drifting in the air, aiming his index finger at the ghoul. He had taken the opportunity when its vision was obscured from swinging its arm and jumped. Quack! The ghoul noticed him, but it was much too late to withdraw its arm. When it opened its mouth wide to shriek, Li Shin Woo launched his index finger bone without delay. The beginner catapult skill has advanced to low rank. Agility has increased by 5. Continuous catapults have become possible. Kuwak! I'll kill you! Li Shin Woo exploded his index finger the moment it lodged into the ghoul's head. Despite the ghoul losing 20% of its head, its stance didn't falter and swung its arm at Li Shin Woo. It staggered a bit from the various injuries it had sustained, but the brutal force within its arm was still the same as ever, and soared through the air with an unpleasant piercing power. Damn it! If he could, he would have shot bullets continuously like the Ratman, but he lacked the mana to do so. He could use it twice more, and if he wanted the scale to be even bigger, he could only use it once more. Li Shin Woo couldn't afford to waste that chance now, and as he fell down powerlessly, he grit his teeth and yelled out. "Help me! I was waiting!" Its spirit was like Superman's. He didn't even know where he came from. The skeleton horse appeared with a speed that made it seem like it could even dodge lightning, and like it had done before, forcefully rammed into the ghoul. Kugak! Who? The ghoul, which had aggroed onto Li Shin Woo, foolishly suffered from the same type of attack as before, and rolled onto the floor. Li Shin Woo used that opportunity to land safety. Still, we can't kill him like this. Li Shin Woo put his sword into his inventory, took a deep breath, and scrutinized the acid ghoul. Despite the ghoul experiencing the bone shot wreathed with flames of revenge, the javelin throw, and even the skeleton horse's weighty, full-strength charge attack one after another, it still stood up in the end. "Go ahead and rest now. I'll finish this and come back. I came over to help." "Sorry. No, you did enough." It had probably been affected by the acid poison when it collided with the ghoul, so its once dignified appearance had definitely lessened quite a bit compared to before. Still, it was worth it. It had not only saved Li Shin Woo's life, but it had created a deadly opening for him. "You, over there. My name is Yi Jin Jin." He only hardened his left arm, and as he looked sharply at the ghoul that stumbled as it stood up, called for Yi Jin Jin. She had already taken out another javelin and looked really nervous, but she was already ready to throw the next one. "Ready?" "Yes." "Good, then, let's go." Li Shin Woo immediately used his combat sprint, kicked off the floor, and charged at the ghoul. At that moment, the ghoul seemed to be making a last-ditch effort and forcefully spewed its acid poison in all directions. Even while it was under the effects of the flames of revenge, it moved as if unhindered, and Li Shin Woo likewise ignored the acid poison and charged. His ribs and legs melted, but his hardened left arm was still intact. At the very least, he wouldn't fall before he reached it. Goo-wah! The ghoul looked as though it had lost all reason and sensitively responded to Li Shin Woo's charge. Its arm dreadfully wriggled and sucked in all the acid poison in the vicinity, and it shot that gathered acid poison directly at Li Shin Woo. It looked as if he had shot a laser beam. Arm! Hub! Even to the very end, the ghoul possessed an attack that he hadn't anticipated. Were all level 4 and up elite monsters like this? But it didn't matter. Yi Jin Jin's preparations were all for a situation like this. Kuhik! As soon as he gave the command, Yi Jin Jin threw her javelin, piercing its arm, and the trajectory of the acid poison twisted significantly. The acid poison spread through the entire area, and the sight of the ground melting away was truly horrific, but the sprinting Li Shin Woo remained fixed on the ghoul. Shin Woo approached within firing range and briefly yelled, "Head! Hot!" Yi Jin Jin's spear-throwing technique was almost like a work of art. The instant he had yelled out, her javelin flew sharply like an awl, and burrowed into the ghoul's wide-open mouth, which was facing Shin Woo. It was probably trying to spew out its acid poison through its mouth, but the timely spear throw from Yi Jin Jin stopped it. "Guak! Aga! I'll let you eat those bones you hate so much." Shin Woo shoved his left arm into its fixed mouth with all his strength. His hardened arm cut through rotten flesh and muscle. The instant his arm burrowed deep within its head, the ghoul opened its eyes wide and bit down. It had instinctually acted like that, as all it had left were malice and wickedness. Gua! Self-destruct. And that right there was the moment that Shin Woo had been waiting for. Kwang! This was the greatest impact he'd experienced since being dropped into the Empire. The sound of the explosion, the shock, and above all, the pressure that struck his entire body. He wasn't able to resist, and Shin Woo rolled raggedly onto the ground. It just hurt, and hurt some more. The moment his arm had been severed, as well as the moment a huge explosion occurred, he felt pain that transcended the limits of his perception. Despite only aiming for the ghoul and activating the skill, it felt as though there were several dozens of holes perforating his body. The low-rank self-destruct skill has become LV2. Magic has increased by 1. The force of the explosion increases. However, he was sure of its effectiveness. The fact that everything above the ghoul's neck had cleanly disappeared from the ghoul's body was proof of that. No, to be exact, it wasn't a corpse yet. Despite it losing its head, it was still alive. It was filled with wounds, and flailed its arm about. Seeing it fumbling around the floor to find Shin Woo, the culprit that made it this way, made him feel goosebumps. From its throat, of which around half was remaining, a truly grotesque voice trickled out. "Who? Hup!" However, Shin Woo resolved himself, and when he was about to grip his weapon, the skeleton horse appeared like lightning and struck the ghoul, dropping its front legs onto it. It was so powerful that he thought that this was what Thor's lightning hammer might be like. The ghoul wasn't even able to spread its acid poison and was stuck in that area, wriggling around a couple of times. In the end, it stopped moving, and the battle was over. You have commanded different individual species and successfully hunted a monster a higher level than you. All stats have increased by 2. Beginner command has become LV7. This is a term that only those who have been saved, not the one who saves, can speak. You have acquired the Savior's Karma token with great success. Strength and magic have increased by 4. You have acquired the active skill, Sacrifice LV1. You have superbly succeeded in executing your revenge. The Beginner Avenger skill has become LV4. When you meet the one who defeated you again, all abilities increase by 30%. Was it because the ghoul persistently hung on until the very end? Despite the message that the party had successfully hunted the ghoul, Shin Woo couldn't believe it and just blankly stood there. However, he did so only briefly. When the ghoul turned into mana and disappeared, leaving behind the dropped items in its place, reality hit him. None of them had died, and had amazingly defeated the monster. "We won. It's all because of you. It was all because you appeared at the right moment that we were able to win so easily." The undead hero and the skeleton horse hero exchanged compliments. Truthfully, they both didn't even have the energy to stand, but while fighting against the ghoul, the ground had become completely covered by the acid poison, so they barely endured, and stood. Thank you very much. Oh, and the last remaining hero cut in. It was none other than Yi Jin Jin, who was dressed in tattered clothing. Of course, Shin Woo had indeed saved her, but he hadn't expected her to bow her head in front of an undead and even thank him. It was honestly something he hadn't expected. It was only really possible if one was extremely pure. This was the first time I've realized that there are also good undead in the Empire. I was really about to die. Thank you very much for helping me. However, at that time, the skeleton horse tilted its head, and then turned its head towards Shin Woo, and asked, You weren't the one who was in danger? The quest or whatever definitely said that there was a hero who was in trouble, and when I got here, you were fighting with that ghoul. No, I also received the quest and came to save her. Huh? You came to save me? Wait, just a second. A hero. The misunderstandings that the party had were all meshed together in the same place. Shin Woo had roughly grasped the situation, but the skeleton horse and Yi Jin looked as though they couldn't understand what was going on at all. Would they be able to understand each other just by talking? Shin Woo sighed and spoke briefly. Let's talk in a calm and orderly way. Ah, before that, wear some clothes. Clothes. Giok. Quest complete. You have acquired 50,000 perium. Strength has increased by 5, agility by 10, health by 3, and magic by 7. You have acquired 3 permits to God's Secret Shop, the Intermediate Ice Resistance Skillbook, and 5 LV3 Equipment Reinforcement permits. Now this was definitely a quest reward. He had acquired 50,000 perium, and secondly, he had gained a total of 25 stats. He had inwardly been looking forward to the skillbook, and was disappointed that it was an ice resistance skillbook, but even when he considered that, it was truly a shocking reward. To think that both of you were heroes? God just granted your wish, yet you became an undead. Shin Woo checked his rewards, and when he sported a satisfied expression, Yi Jin, she had safely changed, looked on disbelievingly, alternating between the two. The skeleton horse noticed her disbelief and spoke somewhat bitterly. You probably won't understand what I say, but I don't know what she did to me. I don't know what happened to my brain. Rather than something like supernatural powers or a miracle, he spoke as if he had experienced a taste of something far worse, and Shin Woo nodded his head in agreement. Of course, he realized that he was too greedy, but still, he hadn't thought that she would just abruptly turn him into a skeleton. If it weren't for the sense of composure that was forced upon him by becoming a skeleton, it would have also been difficult for him to bear. It might be difficult to believe me, but just trust me when I say that I, as well as this guy, are your allies. I trust you. If you think about it, it would have been difficult for you to save me at that precise timing had you not been heroes. It's just... Yi Jin wavered, and then, quietly added. It seems like it was really difficult for you. There was no doubt about that, but the meaning differs depending on how it's said. Shin Woo was momentarily speechless when he heard Yi Jin's simple, honest, and careful words. He felt slightly, extremely slightly guilty that he had acted in order to receive the reward, rather than save this girl. Rather, he felt happy about those emotions. You're a good kid. Not really. But what good does it do me? Strength is everything in the Empire. You're the same level as me. I just feel more shameless hearing that. They had already finished their introductions. Shin Woo's lie that he was level 4 had been exposed, but since it had been revealed that he was an undead already, it didn't really matter anymore. Honestly, it didn't really matter if they figured it out, but if they weren't in a special situation like Yi Jin, his seniors wouldn't easily accept that he was an undead hero, so he had been pushing it back. I'm level 4, but I'm weaker than you. So it's alright. Jin, that's... You said you were level 4 ever since you became a skeleton horse, right? Yeah. Jayan was none other than the skeleton horse. He was obviously a human before, not a horse. In his original world, Jin was a sprinter, and had answered like this when God asked him what he desired. I just want to keep running, faster than anyone else. No matter how he thought about it, God was definitely crazy. To grant that request, she turned him into an undead, and a horse at that. Shin Woo could accept that she turned him into a skeleton and could even understand why, but turning Jin into a skeleton horse made him want to ask God, do you really want the heroes to fight off the Empire? So you're saying you just continuously ran, huh? Without even clearing a single quest? Yeah. I don't know how long it's been since I've been dropped onto this world, but I don't get exhausted, hungry, thirsty, or even tired, and I didn't know what to do, nor did I want to fight monsters. I just ran. I didn't even know about the chatting channel, and until I received this quest, I didn't even know that there were other heroes. If one were to make a wish and the next morning become a skeleton horse, they would obviously be stunned. He just felt that it was frightening that Jin relieved all that stress just by running. He didn't know about anything else, but Jin had probably grown considerably in sprint-related skills. He could completely understand his acceleration speed in such a short distance, as well as the force of the tackle that followed. On the other hand, since he hadn't fought a monster face-to-face even once before, the fact that he responded so sloppily in a combat scenario was natural. Shin Woo, who had some sort of pride in being the one amongst the heroes that had the most unusual history, meekly passed over the crown to Jin. "That's why I think you're really amazing. You said you've only been here for 3 weeks? I don't know how you became such an experienced warrior in just 3 weeks." He's right. That sword strike, or that shot were really. It was undeniable that Shin Woo had played a crucial role in hunting the acid ghoul, but he turned away as the two looked at him as if his face were golden. Just in time, he saw the loot that was rolling on the ground. Jin, who checked which way his head had turned, smiled ambiguously and took a step back. "Ah, the loot. I'll sit this out, since you guys saved me. Please take some, based on how much you contributed with your javelins. You have to be the one that handles the karma that you've sown. It's really only been 3 weeks since you've first been here, right?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It seemed as though Shin Woo knew much more about the truth of this world than she did, and had to ask back. Of course, it turned out exactly as Shin Woo had said. There was only one monster and there were individual drops for each of them, but how their splits would be shared was already determined. 23,510 Perium. Acid Ghoul's Thumbnail. LV4 Acid Skullhelm. 70% of the total Perium was deducted from his share, but he got 2 items. Though he was able to acquire new information that this world did indeed recognize nails as bones due to the Acid Ghoul's Thumbnail. A skeleton doesn't have nails, but they honestly don't need them. But there was something more important than that. Acid Skullhelm. LV4. Durability. 1. 501,500ths. Defense. 250 to 310. Options. Magic plus 10. Effectiveness of acid-type skills plus 10%. A helmet made of its skull. This is really valuable. It's a level 4 helmet. I'm really jealous. Wow, it's really tough. Shin Woo as well as the other two began touching the pale green and sleek helmet, and couldn't stop from being moved. It was beautiful, to the point that he couldn't believe that it was made of bone. It started from the neck, and completely protected the head. There wasn't a separate visor attached, but there was a small crack that he could see through. An undead's head is central to their life. There isn't much to think about. It's more important than body armor. He equipped the helmet at that very spot. Compared to the dire wolf bone armor, which increased his health by 20, it seemed like the additional 10 magic didn't compare, but it had other options besides that. The effectiveness of acid-type skills would increase by 10%. It wasn't just a valuable option because it would increase the effectiveness of his acid resistance. It'll probably help with the skill that I gain from the Acid Ghoul's Thumbnail, too. Yeah. I have to absorb that quickly as well. He turned around and spoke to the black-haired girl and Jin, who were conversing quietly. The battle's over and you're safe now, so I'll get going. Ah. It seemed as though Jin hadn't expected him to say that, as her complexion became ashen, but soon, she nodded her head stiffly. He also had things to think about after this incident. At the very least, he hoped that he wouldn't be negligent during battle or have to roll onto the floor again in the future. Thank you very much for saving my life. I'll probably greet you again in the chatting channel, but let's definitely meet again in the future. Alright, as long as you don't die, we should be able to see each other again. Let's meet again. The skeleton horse, Jin, also said his farewells to Jin. Honestly, Shin Woo had somewhat been expecting that. He smiled slightly and turned around. Jin also turned his body in a similar direction. Jin then shouted at them as loud as she could. I'll help you next time. Say that after you get stronger. Shin Woo walked quietly until he couldn't see Yi Jin Jin anymore. He was trying to get back to the underground tunnel he had dug up to return to the dungeon. However, before he found the underground tunnel, Shin Woo suddenly paused and opened his non-existent mouth. "Shall we start talking?" "Sounds good." Jin, who had been quietly following behind, replied in a beautiful voice that didn't at all match with his exterior appearance. "I was waiting.